All right, if you would turn to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to start in verse 33 tonight. We'll see. We'll try to get through the end of the chapter. I don't know if we will. If not, doesn't look like we're going to be able to. We'll stop in verse 42. That's the section we're going to be looking at first tonight. Also, the battery's dead on our clock at the back, so I will try not to. It just says 10 minutes till 6, so we normally start it after 6, and so I will try not to worry about the clock tonight and get lost. But anyway, I may look at my phone every so often just to see the time. Anyway, we've been going through a study in Matthew, and we're in the section where Jesus has called his disciples aside on the mountain and is preaching to them, teaching them. I should say, he's not necessarily preaching, but he's teaching them things. And if you've kind of been following along, you kind of see where, if you remember, the people he's talking to here grew up under the teachings of the Pharisees and the scribes, men from the temple in Jerusalem. They're in Galilee. These men, mostly, the vast majority of these men are from Galilee, if not all of them. So they didn't grow up as priests, certainly. They grew up your common everyday people. We know several of them were fishermen. Matthew was a tax collector. Others had other jobs that they in occupations, different backgrounds. None of them were very wealthy. Matthew very possibly might have been the wealthiest one of the group. We know James and John, their father, owned his own boats, it appears. Some of the others may have been that way also, or similar situations, but remember, these men grew up being taught the law as the Pharisees and the Sadducees taught it, not necessarily the truth. Remember, the Pharisees and the scribes had taken the law and had redone it. They had, like many do with the Bible today, they had taken things out of context. They had changed things to say what they wanted it to say. The same way a lot of people today take, and a lot of the vast majority of the newer translations, and maybe all of them, I don't know for sure, I don't know all of them, but the vast majority of them that I have looked at, I guess all of the ones that I have looked at, the modern translations anyway, are nothing more than man's interpretation of either the King James or some form of the originals, or maybe even some other older texts that were not used in the King James. They're nothing more than commentaries, in other words. And so what we're seeing here is Jesus is taking the law. He's already said, I believe it was last time we looked at, where he said that, no, it wasn't last time, it was the time before, where he said that, he didn't come to destroy the law, he came to fulfill it. And certainly he did that. And so what he's doing is he's taking parts of the law and explaining it to them in the way that it was originally intended to be understood and to be taught. And if you go all the way back to the Old Testament, you see, at least in the beginning, that's how things were done. But again, the Pharisees and the scribes, and to a point the Sadducees and others from the temple, other priests from the temple, had distorted it. And so Jesus is trying to correct those things here and get these men on the right page and get them heading in the right direction as far as what they believe. And it's the same way we have to do oftentimes if somebody who comes in and joins us and has not been taught the Bible correctly, it's our duty as one of the Lord's churches is to teach that person or persons the truth. And that's what we should be doing, is teaching the truth. Now, verse 33, Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, he's going to be talking about oaths and retaliation in this section, verses 33 through 42. And oaths is a very serious matter. We in our study on Wednesday evening, recently, we studied where King Saul made an oath. It was a wicked oath. It was an oath that for him to show his power and his authority over the people. You know, they had won a battle. They had fought all day and won a battle. And his oath that he ordered was that they were not to eat or drink anything until the evening. So here these men had been fighting for several hours and were worn out and tired and hungry, and he told them they couldn't have anything. And did it in the name of the Lord. That's a false oath. Now, we think of oaths, we think of if you've ever been to jury duty or you've ever run for public office and won, you take an oath. And used to, in our country, it was always done with your hand on a Bible. If you went to court and you went to be put on the witness stand, you were to swear an oath on the Bible. Our politicians, president on down, were always made to give an oath to what they were supposed to do, what they were accountable for, with a hand on the Bible. In recent years, that's changed, of course. Now they use the Quran, or they use something else, whatever they choose to use. And people think, well, that's horrible, but the oath itself is horrible. And that's what Christ is getting at here. You know, you think about how many politicians, and it's not just in modern times, it's all the way back in our nation's history, men and women were made an oath and they swore to uphold the laws of the land, and the vast majority of them haven't done it. Well, that's what Christ is warning about here. Don't swear to something if you're not going to stick to it. Same way in court. If you're on the jury and you're sworn to uphold the law, how many juries have we seen just in our day and time that were swayed by a wicked lawyer or attorney to go against the law of the land? Now, how many people should be in prison today that are not because the jury was persuaded in the other direction? And therefore they broke their oath. They didn't follow the law of the land. It's my understanding that, and I've seen it personally in places, men stand and say that they would not give an oath for jury duty. And from what I understand, you have that right, which is a good thing. The more I study this and the older I get, the more I understand maybe we shouldn't be given an oath when we go to jury duty or on the witness stand. Because what happens is, what if you're caught in a lie? You just swore on the Bible, swore to God and to everybody in that room that you were going to tell the truth, but what if you didn't? There's consequences. Verse 33, again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time. And he's talking about the prophets, the people back in the Old Testament. Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. So don't swear on a stack of Bibles. That's used to be a common phrase, I'll swear on a stack of Bibles, I'll do this. Don't do that. That's against God's word. Why? Because God will make a mockery out of you, especially if you don't stick to it. But he says, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. In other words, just do it. Just tell the truth. You don't have to swear on a stack of Bibles. You don't have to swear to this or that you'll do something. Some people swear on their mother's grave. You know, you see that used to see that in the westerns sometimes. But just do it. Just tell the truth. You're a child of God, right? Tell the truth. You shouldn't have to swear an oath. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne. In other words, we have no business making an oath or swearing to God, to heaven, or to God's throne. We don't have the authority. Nor by the earth, for it is his footstool. Everything belongs to God. We have no right to offer an oath or to swear by something that doesn't belong to us. Neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. In other words, we can't even swear by our own selves, because we are not ourselves. We are not owned by ourselves. We are owned by God. We are his. But, he says, but let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. So, just tell the truth, is what he's saying. It's either yes or no. If you're asked a question in court, yes or no. And anything else, he says, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. Tell the truth. Anything that's not the truth is evil. Now, he goes into retaliation next. Verse 38. Verse 38 says, ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. Well, the Bible tells us that, doesn't it? In the law, in Deuteronomy. But was that the original intent? Or if somebody comes and pokes your eye out, are you supposed to retaliate and go and poke their eye out? Well, no, the way the priest in the Old Testament understood it, and they taught, was that if somebody poked your eye out, they owed you money. They owed you possessions, money or animals or something, whatever the cost of you losing that eye was worth, that's what they were to pay you. That was the retaliation. That was the punishment. The Pharisees, on the other hand, their policy was, well, if somebody pokes your eye out, bring them to us, to the Sanhedrin, or to a lower court of the temple, and we'll rule on it, and they would poke that other guy's eye out. Or a tooth for a tooth. If he knocked your tooth out in a fight, and it wasn't your fault, he was the one that instigated it. They'd knock one of his teeth out. That's how they worked. Well, that was not the intent of the law. That was not the intent of God's word. If you have an injury from somebody injures you on purpose, it's not an accident, but if it's on purpose, or even in an accident, it even makes provisions. If we have a provision today in our laws, if you're injured in a car accident, the other person's insurance is supposed to cover that. If your vehicle is damaged by their vehicle, and it's purely an accident, they didn't do it on purpose. There's provisions in our law of the land that they are to pay whatever is the damage is worth, and they do so by using their insurance policy. There are different forms of insurance policies. You can get health insurance. You can have automobile insurance. You have insurance on your home. So if I don't know how it is today. Used to, you had homeowners insurance. So if somebody was injured on your property, even, it would take care of their medical bills, whatever their injuries were. That you would file on your homeowner's insurance, and it would take care of that. I've not heard of. Used to, that was a big thing. Now you don't hear much about it anymore. But used to, people would purposely go and injure themselves on somebody's property, and just to sue them, so they would have to pay them. You know, and that's a little bit. Oh, that's the extreme. Verse 39. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil. But whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. Now, some of these things that we're seeing are taken to the extreme today. And you have people who are conscientious objectors, is what they call themselves. People who, and are different whole religious groups, who will not fight a battle for their country. They won't fight anybody. Matter of fact, they take it to the extreme. Well, it says if somebody hits you on the cheek, you're to turn it to the other cheek and so they can hit it too. No, that's not what was the intent. Yes, we're to not take advantage of the situation and seek a scrap or a fight, but he says, I say unto you that ye resist not evil. Now, we think, well, what about those who are preaching false doctrine or following false religions? Are we to not argue with them, and are not to debate, not necessarily debate, but carry on conversations with them and get angry about what they believe? And well, no, he's not talking about that. The Bible clearly states that we're to preach out against false doctrine and those who are preaching false doctrine. The Bible is clear that, if it comes down to it, we have an obligation to our nation to defend it when it comes down to it. We're even to defend ourselves and our families if it comes down to it. You take, especially some of the extreme Amish and Mennonites and some other of the so-called Anabaptist groups, they won't fight back. If somebody comes on their place and steals their animals, they just let them get by with it. They have no retaliation for them, and they go back to these scriptures here for that. But that was not the intent. Remember, Christ was teaching these men here that there are consequences for people doing things to you. And yes, we see. Well, if you remember when Jesus was arrested, remember Peter pulled a sword and cut the guy's ear off? And Jesus picked his ear up and put it back on? Peter did something he wasn't supposed to. That was not, Peter's retaliation to that man was not justified. It was not according to the law. And so that was another lesson there. Jesus was trying to teach to Peter that you don't do that. You don't strike out at somebody because they've arrested you. And we see it in our country. People, they think that they got more authority and more rights than law enforcement. And when law enforcement comes out to arrest them for a crime they've committed, and especially when it's very clear that they committed a crime, they try to fight back, or they try to run. And then people get mad when the police officer shoots them. Well, one, the police officer was either defending himself, is the way it usually winds up happening, or, we used to see, you used to see it in the news years ago, or on TV shows and movies, and it was real reenactments. A cop would holler out, "Stop or I'll shoot." Well, what happened? If the guy didn't stop, the cop shot him. If you're dumb enough to run from somebody that's in authority that has a gun on you. It's one thing if the guy is not of the law, if he's an evil person and not out for good, that's one thing. But when somebody in authority tells you to stop, stop. Don't keep running, and then don't threaten to sue them when they shoot at you. You know, that's how our society has come today. People are looking for an out for their sin. They want an excuse. They want their sin to be justified, and you can't justify sin. That he says, but I say unto you that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And I heard somebody preach on this one time, and they said, you know, if they smite you on the right cheek, you turn to them with the left cheek, and they let them smite you on that cheek, and then you turn around and hit them back. No, that's not what he's saying here. Are we to defend ourselves? Certainly, we have the right to defend ourselves. But be careful. If a man stabs you, you don't have the right to stab him back. You can take him to court. You can have him arrested. That's the policy. That's the law of the land. That's the way it was in the law of Moses. If somebody did something that wronged you, if they somebody killed your child or killed your spouse, you took them to the court, whether it was the court at the temple or the court of the land, and there were laws that took care of that, just as there is today. We see, and it amazes me at how our politicians come up with new laws almost every day that supersede laws that were already in effect. When if they would just enforce the laws that were already on the books, you wouldn't need the new law that he just came up with. Some of these things people are just making a name for themselves, or think they are. That's why they're doing it. If there's a law already on the books, you don't need another law to make things right. Just enforce the law that's already there. The same way with the law of Moses. The Sadducees and the scribes had added to and taken away from it so much, it wasn't even the same anymore. They had, and a lot of these things that he's covering, again, what I mentioned earlier, the Sadducees and the scribes had been so strict on people. They had taken things to the extreme. So if somebody poked your eye out, they would tell you to go poke their eye out. That's how they ruled. Or if you took them to court, the punishment would be to poke their eye out, give them back what they did to you. Well, that's not what the Lord was talking about. The law of Moses, it gives provisions. It gave consequences. If you did something bad, you had to pay a price. And sometimes it even, depending on what it was, it might even amount to you being a servant to that person until you pay that debt back. If you didn't have a lamb or a goat to give them, or money, you might have to go work for them for free until you pay that debt back. Verse 40, and if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And your coat would be like an overcoat. Your cloak would be what you would wear underneath. He says, if a man will sue you and if a man's going to sue you in court, why would he sue you in court? Well, for the things that he's just talked about. Or if you've done whatever you've done wrong, don't argue with him. Don't fight with him over it. Just do it. And this goes back to making your communication yea, yea, and nay, nay, to tell the truth. If you've done something wrong, admit to it. Fess up to it. And that may mean that you lose something. It may mean that it cost you financially. It may cost you one of your prized possessions. whatever the ruling is. So if a man sues you in the court of law and you're in the wrong, and he wins, and the verdict or the punishment is that you have to give him your coat, don't just stop there, give him your cloak also. Pay him more, in other words, than what you actually owe him, and be done with it. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. In other words, if a man challenges you to walk a mile in his shoes, don't just stop at a mile. Go 2 miles with him. Go extra. Go the extra mile. That's where that saying comes from. In other words, we, being a former manager on the job, you always expected your employees to give 100%, and you always had there's always those people who will give more than 100%. They'll do more than everybody else, and a lot of times it's not for show. It's just that that's how they've been taught growing up, was that you give more than what's expected. And if you owe somebody something, give them more than what's expected. We think about interest on a loan, but this is not a loan. This is a life situation where, if somebody has been harmed because of something you've done, don't just give them what is owed. Give them a little extra. In other words, try to keep the peace. You see what he's doing here? And we're not going to get into the next section tonight, but if we love our neighbors and we've done something to wrong our neighbor, we give them a little extra to keep the peace, don't we? Just giving them back exactly what we took, oftentimes it's just a poke in the eyes of what we say. It's just it soothes over the situation, but it doesn't heal the situation. Give a little extra. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not away. So here's another situation where, if someone comes and asks for help, if they come and say, hey, I need to borrow your lawnmower, to mow my grass, mine's broke, let them borrow it. There's no harm in that. Now, understand, if that person's one of those types that, you've seen him out there with his mower and he's rough with it and he's jumping ditches and running over stumps and that kind of stuff, maybe you offer to go mow his grass for him instead. It'd be the same thing, And he said, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. Be kind to your neighbors. And he gets into that in the next section. We're not going to start that tonight, but just know he goes right in next with, ye have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thy enemy. So if you love your neighbor, you're going to be a good witness. Be a good witness. Be a good witness for Christ. Show your neighbor, whoever it is, whether it's the person living next door to you or across the street or a fellow church member. Maybe it's somebody broke down on the side of the road that needs help. That nowadays you have to be careful about that. I understand. If the Lord is compelling you to stop, though, stop. Stop and help him. If he's not, might be a reason for that. So be careful about that. Use some common sense, in other words, on that. But just remember, as we're going through all this, and we've got a long ways to go, all the way through the end of chapter 7, where he's preaching to the disciples there. And he's teaching them to be good stewards of his church. They're the men that are going to lead the church after he leaves, after his ascension. They don't know this yet, but he does. Jesus knows this. And so he's teaching them how to be how to prepare the people for the Christian life. That's what he's doing. And again, it's specifically to the church, to his church, but it's also, these are good things for all Christians, all of God's people. The problem we see today is we expect people who are not saved to follow these same rules. And you can't expect that. Now, when the law of the land is written, yes, people have to, we should expect people to follow the law of the land. But the law of God, you can't expect a lost person, someone who has never been in a church, somebody who has never read a Bible, somebody who's never been taught these things. Don't expect them to just jump up and do what you think they should do. And a lot of the problem with the legalistic-minded preachers is, they think everybody should have to abide by these things. Well, no, that's not what Christ was teaching. He was teaching these things to his church, specifically to his church, and secondly to his people. So remember that also. You can't expect men who are wicked and evil to understand these things. They have no desire. God didn't put a desire in them. They don't have God in their life. That's what they don't know. And so we have the laws of our land to protect the rest of us from people like that. And they are under the authority of the law of our land. The problem is are the ones who enforce the laws of our land don't always see it that way. They try to be lenient. They try to be liberal and progressive in those things, and they think that, well, everybody deserves a second chance, and certainly I believe in second chances with people, but sometimes you have people who have had more than their share of chances, and the law needs to come down hard on them sometimes. And maybe the law should have come down hard on them the first or second time, and they wouldn't be where they are today. So remember these things, and we'll